Hi, my name is Jonathan Bailey, and this is going to be my story behind the story project presentation. In this presentation, I will be going into behind the cynical mind of Edgar Allan Poe. In this project, it's going to be a three-part presentation, starting with Part 1. Why are Edgar Allan Poe's works so dark? As one of the most well renowned historic literary authors, Edgar Allan Poe constantly wrote his works on the recurring themes of death, regret, and the loss of love. In this project, I did my thesis statement on Edgar Allan Poe's literary works seem to have some correlation to his life experience rather than raw creative imagination. In order to prove this statement, we must ask two important questions. What personal events in Edgar Allan Poe's life experience led him to predominantly write about the themes of death, regret, and the loss of love? And are Edgar Allan Poe's works solely creative fiction, or are they loosely autobiographically inspired? To answer these questions, we must look through important events in Edgar Allan Poe's life experience that would lead him to write about this dark obsession, and also look through his literary works to find any parallels with his life experience. Part 2. The unforgiving life experience. In this part, we are to be talking about various unfortunate events that Edgar Allan Poe went through, starting with becoming an orphan as a baby, going into unsupportive foster father, then to his unwanted military career, then to his romantic hurdles, and then finally with the loss of love. Starting with becoming a young orphan. Born January 19th, 1809, to David and Eliza Poe, a family of traveling actors. When Edgar was only one, his father abandoned his family and left his mother with three children. 1 year later, Eliza contracted tuberculosis, causing them to settle in Richmond, Virginia, where she would die 3 months later. Being orphaned at the age of 2, Edgar was then taken by a wealthy couple in Richmond named John and Frances Allan. Growing up as an orphan would have generated some confusion for Edgar Allan Poe, as he is without any sort of connection with his biological roots. Going into an unsupportive foster father. Although Edgar would go on to enjoy his teenage life as the elite upper class, his relationship with his foster father would become a big source of conflict, misery, and pain. John Allan, a tobacco exporter, was always very unsupportive and dismissive of Edgar's life aspirations, only wanting him to go into the family business. Allan also repeatedly refused to give Poe the necessary financial support that he needed to afford his classes, causing him to gain thousands of dollars in debt due to a gambling addiction. This unpleasant relationship not only caused a lack of unconditional love in Poe's life, but also caused him to grow a large resentment towards his foster father. Going into his unwanted military career, due to the massive debt that Edgar had gathered, he had no other choice but to enroll in a 5 year stint with the United States Army to support himself. Poe excelled, with the Army being promoted to sergeant. However, he was also desperate to find a way out. Poe attempted to plead with his commanding officer to release him early. However, he was told, in order to leave, he would have to ask his adoptive father for permission. Poe constantly wrote to Allan, but to no avail. It wasn't until the death of Poe's adoptive mother when the two would meet again, and he would finally grant him permission to leave the Army, but only on the terms that he attended West Point Military Academy. Once again, desperate to find a way out, Poe wrote to his father for permission to leave the academy, but due to him remarrying, he was gone for good. This time, Poe had no other choice but to flunk all of his studies and purposely get himself kicked out of the university. A shame, really. Romantic hurdles. For Edgar Allan Poe, Sarah Elmira Roaster Shelton was considered to be both Edgar's first and last love. Growing up in Richmond together, these two were very close and would regularly engage with each other in their teenage years. Once Poe left his home to attend the University of Virginia, both Edgar and Sarah attempted a long distance relationship with each other through writing letters back and forth. However, this romance didn't last long when Sarah's father, James, found out and started to intercept their letters, making both parties think that the other was done with the relationship. This was done because presumably James didn't want his daughter marrying a poor orphan boy like Edgar Allan Poe. I mean, it's really a shame. How could he? Moving on to the loss of love, specifically of the love of Francis Allan. Unlike his traumatizing relationship with his unloving foster father, John Allan, Poe was very close with his foster mother. The two had a strong connection, which he would write about in his earliest unpublished writings. During Poe's military service, Francis's health started to dwindle. This information, however, was unknown by Poe due to his disconnect with his foster parents at the time. This being said, the news of the passing of Francis Allan was a complete shock to Poe, naturally. To make matters worse, Poe also missed his foster mother's funeral due to his complications with getting released from the military. This loss was crucial to Poe because at the time it was his only source of unconditional love. Man, it's so sad. Moving on to the loss of love, part 2. Specifically, his wife, Virginia Clem. Arguably, the most impactful death around Poe was the death of his wife, Virginia Clem. Despite the multitude of rocky relationships that Poe had with in his life, this was completely different. Poe had such a deep love and care for this woman, to the point where he idolized her. Virginia had a positive effect on Poe's mental well-being, as well as making him more responsible and productive. After 11 years into their marriage, Virginia started showing worsening symptoms of tuberculosis, causing her to pass away in 1847. This tragedy sparked a terrible shift into Edgar Allan Poe, in which he would never emotionally recover from. Without the mental and emotional support that she gave him, Edgar Allan Poe resorted back to living a life of tragedy. She was also 13, by the way. Part 3, autobiographical literary examples. In this section, we are going to look through Edgar Allan Poe's works to see if we could find any specific relation to his actual life in his works. And we are going to look at 2 of his works. One, The Cask of Amontillado, and Annabel Lee. Starting with Cask of Amontillado. In The Cask of Amontillado, Poe writes a tale of revenge on an upstanding and popular man that had wronged the protagonist. There are many clues in this tale that show Poe's feelings of resentment and want for revenge on his foster father. The character Fortunato is meant to represent his foster father, John Allan. Fortunato uses an old Scottish phrase to signal the character's family descent and is further described by the townspeople as rich, respected, admired, beloved, which are all direct correlations to Poe's foster father. At the end of the story, the character Montresor is meant to represent Poe, exposes and takes revenge on Fortunato, his foster father, for being a fraud and a dishonorable man, which are Poe's true feelings towards his foster father. Moving on to Annabel Lee. A common theme throughout Poe's writings is the admiration and idealization of women characters. He always took great care in describing the women's characters as delicate and light in his writings. Not in weight, light as in graceful. True to his feelings towards women, Annabel is written as a good and delicate woman who loves her lover unconditionally, something that Poe did not have much of. However, True to Poe's style, the lovers are torn apart by the tragedy of Annabelle's death, a direct correlation of his feelings towards lover Virginia Clem's death. And you can start to see the correlation in those two writings. So here we are at the end, the conclusion. Looking at Edgar Allan Poe's tragic life, never having a connection with his biological roots, having a difficult and neglectful upbringing, suffering from a lack of unconditional love, not having a reliable support system, being forced to live a life you resent, and losing the ones that he loved most are all plenty of reasons why we see such dark fantasies being illustrated in his writings. Many clues alluding to Poe's life are found deliberately throughout his literary works. His life is used as inspiration for his writings and as a way for Poe to express his feelings of love, loss, and resentment. With this reasoning, we can conclude that his writings are not just tragic creative fiction, but meant as a loose representation of his life. It's all connected. And that is my works cited page, and this is the end of my project. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful day.